Judgment. Breakdown is a spiritual awakening. Let's begin with that striking image. A radiant angel blowing a trumpet from the heavens while naked figures rise from coffins below. It's not just biblical theater, it's the soul's alarm clock. In tarot, the Judgment card doesn't announce doom. It announces transformation. We're talking about a moment of resurrection, a call to consciousness, a metaphysical rebirth. Carl Jung would have loved it. This is the self calling the ego home after a long, messy journey. It's not just symbolic, it's psychological. And oh boy, it's loud. This card grabs you by the psyche and says, wake up. The trumpet, the divine messenger, represents sound as catalyst, a vibration that splits the unconscious like a lightning bolt and forces the ego to reckon with what it's ignored. These figures? They're rising from the depths of shadow, shedding shame, guilt, and the masks they wore. The angel above is no external judge. It's the higher self, demanding the integration of light and dark. This isn't about punishment. It's about wholeness. When someone draws this card, they're not being punished, they're being called. And that call might look like a crisis, the end of a relationship, a burnout, a moment where life drops you to your knees. But that's the genius of archetypes. They speak in symbols so the soul can hear. You're not losing control. You're losing illusions. This card doesn't ask for perfection. It demands honesty, and it offers liberation in return. You'll notice the figures have no clothes. That's no accident. It's about stripping the persona, the false self, the overcompensated ego, and standing exposed in the light of truth. If you're in a period of inner reckoning, this is your sacred temenos, your inner temple. You're not dying. You're being reborn. The only question is, are you ready to rise when the trumpet sounds? Because whether you're ready or not, it's blowing either way. The Judgment card always comes after the sun, and that's no coincidence. First the joy, then the truth. First the light, then the test. Think of this card as the final checkpoint before completion. A chance to integrate, to reclaim your destiny, to hear the inner voice you've long silenced. And just when you think you've grasped the light, you hear something deeper calling you into the next mystery. Sound as a spiritual catalyst. Before there was light, there was sound. That's not just a poetic line. It's embedded in sacred texts and myths from Genesis to the Vedas. In the beginning was the Word. The Judgment card taps straight into that primordial vibration. The trumpet here isn't a cute detail. It's a spiritual detonator. Sound hits the nervous system faster than light, bypasses the intellect, and rattles the unconscious. That's why the trumpet wakes the dead. It doesn't ask permission. It commands transformation. In Jungian language, sound acts as a direct line between ego and unconscious, bypassing layers of resistance. Ever wonder why a single song can crack open years of numbness or trigger tears you didn't know you were holding? That's not just nostalgia, that's metaphysical resonance. Just like a tuning fork vibrates in harmony, your psyche responds to vibration it recognizes as truth. This is why mantras, chants, even guided meditations can unlock something no book ever could. Think of Gregorian chants, Sufi whirling, or even the booming bass at a concert that makes your chest vibrate. In every case, you're not just hearing sound, you're being moved by it. Try this. Next time you're overwhelmed, hum deeply for 60 seconds. Feel the vibration in your chest. It's a small way to remind your system that you're alive here now. The angel's trumpet is this exact principle, but cosmic in scale. It breaks the silence of your sleepwalking life. When we talk about spiritual awakening, most people imagine light, visions, maybe divine downloads. But the Judgment card shows something different. Your rebirth might come with noise, discomfort, or a shocking jolt. That's why it's so potent. It doesn't gently suggest you awaken. It makes it impossible to keep sleeping. This is why the unconscious chooses sound. It bypasses filters. It enters uninvited. And it leaves echoes that demand interpretation. So the next time you feel shaken by a voice, a message, or even a strange sound in your dream, don't dismiss it. That could be your trumpet, the moment when you're not just informed, but transformed. Because after the call, the psyche has no choice but to answer, and that answer is where the real journey begins. Psychological interpretation through Jungian functions. Let's take a closer look at those figures rising from the graves in the Judgment card. Each one, in their raw, unclothed state, isn't just a symbol of rebirth. They're representations of the psyche's fragmented parts. Carl Jung gave us a brilliant framework to explore this. The 4 psychological functions: sensation, intuition, thinking, and feeling. Now, what if those figures weren't just resurrected humans, but personifications of these inner faculties returning to the light of consciousness? The hero here is often associated with the thinking function, logical, structured, striving for clarity. But when that thinking becomes rigid, the hero risks losing access to the richness of the unconscious. That's when judgment arrives. It's a psychic recall, a divine announcement that says, "You've ignored too much for too long." Each function has its gift. Intuition reveals possibilities. Sensation anchors you in the now. Feeling connects you to values. Ignore one, and you hobble through life uneven. People who dominate through one function, say chronic overthinkers, often wake up in crisis. They've built entire lives on intellect, while their emotional and sensory worlds atrophy in silence. The trumpet of judgment doesn't whisper to thinkers in logic. It roars through dreams, synchronicities, and feelings they can't rationalize. Suddenly, the ego feels haunted, but it's not a ghost. It's the neglected function, begging to be integrated. That's where rebirth starts. To begin balancing your psyche, ask yourself, which function do I suppress the most? For thinkers, that might mean tuning into feeling. What movies move you? Which relationships nourish or drain you? For those led by sensation, try journaling dreams or exploring archetypes. This is more than self-help, it's individuation, a sacred dance toward wholeness. The figures in Judgment aren't simply waking, they're remembering forgotten parts of themselves. And that's where the real healing begins. So next time you see this card, don't just ask what it means, ask what you've been ignoring. Which voice inside you is still buried? Because judgment is never random. It arrives when the psyche is ready to evolve. And just when you think you've understood the message, the archetypal hero begins his deeper descent toward integration. The journey of the hero archetype. Every soul has its odyssey, and in the tarot, the hero walks a path laced with paradoxes, pitfalls, and revelations. From the lovers to the sun, each card is a stage in the evolution of consciousness. By the time we reach Judgment, the hero has been shattered by the tower, humbled by the moon, and purified by the star. He's lost illusions, battled his shadow, and been stripped to essence. That's why he can finally hear the trumpet. His ego isn't in the way anymore. Let's be real. The path of awakening isn't a feel-good Instagram quote. It's terrifying. The tower doesn't collapse gently. The moon doesn't light the path clearly. The hero doubts himself, questions his destiny, and sometimes even wishes he could go back. But this tension is exactly what catalyzes transformation. That's the genius of symbolic life. It tells you that your breakdown is sacred. Not a detour, but the door. Your dark night of the soul is part of the contract. Jung knew this intimately. He called it the process of individuation. It's not about becoming perfect, it's about becoming whole. The archetype of the hero is one who faces inner dragons, self-deception, shame, fear of being seen. And when he survives, he doesn't return the same. He comes back with gifts, wisdom, empathy, and the courage to live authentically. Just like Frodo with his scar, or Simba claiming the throne, the hero returns, but never as he was. If you've been through a season where everything you counted on fell apart, you're not cursed. You're being called. Maybe you've lost your job, your faith, or your sense of self. That's the moon phase. Confusing, lonely. But right after the moon comes the sun, and then judgment. Your crisis is the curriculum. The hero archetype doesn't avoid the fall. He learns how to land with grace. That's how the psyche readies itself for resurrection. And once the hero stands again, reborn and restructured, he realizes that death was never the end. It was the threshold. But just as he finds his footing, the memory of older myths begins to echo, ancient rituals that whispered of something even deeper. Descent and resurrection in myth and ritual. Long before tarot cards existed, humanity told stories of descent and return. Think of Persephone dragged to the underworld, or Osiris dismembered and resurrected. These weren't just cultural myths, they were psychological maps. The Judgment card echoes this universal theme. You must die to who you were in order to awaken who you are. Jung saw myth as a mirror of the unconscious, and these death-rebirth cycles as essential for individuation. No fall, no rising. No shadow, no integration. In the Eleusinian mysteries, initiates underwent symbolic death to prepare for spiritual rebirth. It wasn't a metaphor, it was an initiation. Likewise, the psyche needs ritual moments of collapse. That's why psychological breakdowns often come just before breakthroughs. When your ego crumbles, your unconscious finally has space to speak. This is the descent, the in-between, the sacred darkness, the place where symbols arise, meaning reforms, and the soul reorganizes itself around something deeper. Let's talk real life. Ever gone through a breakup that left you questioning your entire identity? Or a burnout that made you stare at the ceiling, wondering what the hell you've been doing with your life? That's a psychic death. The old self doesn't just go quietly, it fights, resists, panics. But once it lets go, the space for rebirth emerges. It's not pretty, but it's holy. In those moments, the tarot doesn't offer answers, it offers a mirror. And judgment becomes your myth. These myths and rituals weren't about escaping life. They were about returning to it renewed. That's what resurrection really means. It's not about rising into heaven. It's about descending so deeply into your soul that when you rise again, you carry heaven with you. Your perception shifts, your energy changes, and the life you once endured becomes a life you're now consciously shaping. That's metaphysical rebirth. That's what the angel's trumpet awakens in you. And just as myth carried ancient people through their inner hells, so too can you trace your path through symbolic resonance. But what happens when these stories stop being abstract? When they crash into your real modern life? That's when the line between myth and memory gets personal, and suddenly, your own descent becomes a sacred case study in transformation. Case study of personal psychological breakdown and rebirth. Imagine waking up one day and realizing that everything you've built, your career, your relationships, even your spiritual identity, feels hollow. That was my judgment moment. Not metaphorical, not poetic. Literal. I felt like my soul had quietly slipped out the back door while I kept performing the role of who I thought I was. No more spark. No more meaning, just a quiet, unbearable numbness. That's what Jung would call a psychic death, and it's brutal. In that void, tarot became more than a deck, it became a lifeline. The Judgment card stared back at me with its naked figures and blaring trumpet, and I knew it wasn't judging me, it was inviting me. to feel again, to stop hiding behind intellect and embrace sensation, intuition, and the aching feeling I'd buried under productivity. It became clear my dominant function had hijacked the show, and my inferior function, sensation, was screaming for recognition. I started small, cooking with my hands instead of ordering out, walking barefoot on grass, sitting in the sun and doing nothing. These weren't just activities, they were resurrections. By reclaiming my body, I reclaimed my vitality. And then intuition kicked in. Dreams returned. Symbols came alive. I realized I'd been operating from a fractured ego, efficient, successful, but spiritually starved. The angel's trumpet had sounded. I just hadn't been listening. One night, I laid the judgment card next to the moon and the star and suddenly saw the whole arc: descent, purification, rebirth. That wasn't a myth. That was my life. The card didn't promise that I'd be fixed. It offered something much deeper, the chance to be whole, to live integrated, not perfect, to honor both light and shadow, intellect and emotion, clarity and mystery. I wasn't healed overnight, but I was reborn in awareness. And that's the thing. Once you taste this kind of resurrection, you can't go back. But here's the twist. Healing doesn't end with insight. The deeper transformation comes when you realize that even your inferior function holds the key to your destiny. And the moment you stop resisting it, something wild and sacred begins to grow. The role of the inferior function in personal development. Carl Jung wasn't just interested in what made people tick. He wanted to know what made them whole. His theory of psychological types wasn't a neat personality quiz. It was a roadmap. Each person has a dominant function, something they rely on to navigate the world, but hidden in the shadows is the inferior function. It's awkward, underdeveloped, often ignored, yet it's the golden key to transformation. The judgment card is where that key starts to glow. Let's say you're a thinker, rational, strategic, efficient. You're praised for it. But feeling? That's messy, unpredictable, even scary. So you push it down. You don't notice when you're hurt or when others are. But repression has a cost. The more you deny the inferior function, the more pressure builds in the unconscious. Until one day the trumpet sounds, and it's not music. It's the sound of a breakdown. That's the moment the psyche demands balance. Here's the kicker. The inferior function doesn't just cause pain, it holds genius. If sensation is your blind spot, reclaiming it might awaken creativity, intimacy, even joy. If intuition terrifies you, developing it could open portals to purpose and inner vision. The resurrection shown in the judgment card is, in part, the return of the rejected function. It rises from the grave not to haunt you, but to heal you. And if you're brave enough, to make you whole. Want to begin? Start by observing what triggers you in others. Often, we reject in others what we've buried in ourselves. Then play. Let yourself be terrible at something new. Paint badly. Dance like no one's watching. Write nonsense. The point isn't mastery, it's integration. You're not just doing an activity. You're unearthing buried gold. That's individuation. That's the psychological redemption Jung pointed to. And it begins not with pride, but with humility. So when the angel in judgment raises the trumpet, it's also summoning your lost functions home. The forgotten parts, the suppressed voices, the psychic exiles. And as they return, something miraculous happens, responsibility. Not just the burden of adulthood, but the sacred duty to live as your full self. And that sense of inner calling is exactly what happens next. Spiritual responsibility after awakening. So you've had your awakening. The trumpet's been heard, the shadow's been faced, and the light has broken through. Now what? Here's where most people stumble. They think awakening is the finish line. But in reality, it's just the starting bell. The Judgment card doesn't just liberate, it commissions. Once you see, you can't unsee. And once you know, you can't unknow. With greater awareness comes a deeper responsibility to live in alignment with your truth and stop pretending you don't know better. Spiritual rebirth isn't about escaping your problems. It's about returning to them with new eyes and a renewed self. The angel doesn't say, "Congratulations, you're done." It says, "Now rise." And rising means showing up for your path, your community, your purpose. That might look like finally quitting the soul-sucking job, or speaking the truth in a relationship you've outgrown, or taking ownership of your creative gift instead of waiting for someone to approve it. Freedom isn't ease. It's conscious choice. Jung would say you're no longer just ego, you're stepping into self. And that self doesn't just float above the world, it engages with it. It honors the sacred temenos of your inner life while participating fully in outer life. You start to realize that your individuation isn't just for you, it's your offering to the world. You've been liberated from old patterns, yes, but now you're bound to something higher, a calling, a role in the divine order of things. That calling doesn't have to be dramatic. It could be the way you raise your kids, the way you write, or how you listen to others. The point is, you're no longer sleepwalking. Your actions ripple with awareness. Your energy becomes medicine for others. You're not just living, you're embodying consciousness. This is the part most people avoid because it's not glamorous. But it's sacred. Liberation isn't licensed to float off into the clouds. It's an invitation to walk the earth as a vessel of light. And just as you begin to carry this awareness into the world, you realize something deeper. Redemption isn't leaving the world behind. It's returning to it transformed. It's reclaiming the parts of yourself that were once pawned off to survive. And just when you think you've completed your mission, you hear the whisper of destiny calling again, from a deeper place still. The dynamics of liberation, redemption, and vocation. Redemption isn't a one-time event, it's a living, breathing process. In the Judgment card, liberation doesn't mean floating off into bliss. It means stepping back into life with renewed purpose. Think of it like being released from a pawn shop. You've reclaimed something essential, something you gave away in exchange for survival. Your creativity, your voice, your faith. And now that it's back, the question isn't just what now, it's what for. That's where vocation enters the picture. Vocation isn't just your job, it's your soul's assignment. It's the specific way you're meant to serve the world with your newly integrated self. Jung believed each person had a unique path in the great web of consciousness, a sacred role in the unfolding story of the cosmos. But here's the twist. That path only becomes clear after the breakdown, the descent, the surrender. Before that, you're still caught in ego games. After that, you're finally ready to listen. And the call, it might not come as a booming voice. It might be a quiet pull toward art, teaching, healing, or building something beautiful. You'll know it by the sense of alignment it brings, not comfort, but clarity. You'll feel like your life has weight again. That's the soul saying, we're back on track. This is redemption, not the wiping away of pain, but the weaving of pain into purpose. And it changes how you show up in every room you enter. Remember the figures in the Judgment card? They're not just free. They're connected. They're part of something larger. That's what spiritual rebirth does. It breaks the illusion of separation. Suddenly, your life isn't just yours. It's part of a divine orchestra, and you're finally playing your note. The joy isn't in being exceptional, it's in being aligned. This is what it means to live metaphysically. Every action charged with symbolic meaning, every moment a chance to embody redemption. And just when you begin to live this way, with integrity, with intention, you hear something new in the angel's trumpet. It's not just a call to rise. It's a call to unite, to connect the fragments of psyche and cosmos. And as you begin to answer that call, something miraculous unfolds within the image of the card itself. Integration of psyche and divine communication. At first glance, the Judgment card may seem loud and celestial, but look again. There's something tender happening beneath the trumpet blast. The figures below are no longer scattered, confused, or fragmented. They're humanized, aware, connected. This is what integration looks like, not perfection, but participation. The psyche has aligned with the divine, and for the first time, there's a dialogue between what is above and what is within. That angel, it's not separate. It's the voice of the higher self finally being heard. Carl Jung described individuation as a process of becoming whole, not good. And here we see that principle in motion. These resurrected souls aren't blank slates. They carry their past, their wounds, their stories. But now, those elements serve the light. This is the integration of shadow and self, ego and soul. The unconscious no longer speaks in symbols alone. It's been translated into conscious awareness. That's why the figures rise. They're not escaping, they're embodying. When the inner and outer worlds finally speak the same language, everything changes. Synchronicities increase. Intuition sharpens. Your life begins to feel like it's being written in a language you're just starting to understand. That's what divine communication feels like. It's not always verbal, but it's always precise. The psyche becomes a temple, the body a resonant instrument, and life itself becomes a symbolic conversation between you and the infinite. In practical terms, this looks like alignment. You're no longer forcing your path. You're following energy. Decisions become clearer. Relationships shift. You begin to trust your own knowing. And most importantly, you stop outsourcing authority. You realize the divine isn't somewhere far away. It's in the whisper of your own consciousness. This is the sacred temenos, the place where truth is received without noise. The card shows this not through grandeur, but through stillness. And as the final card, the world, begins to shimmer just beyond the edges of judgment, you realize something profound. This isn't the end. It's the beginning of a life lived in wholeness, of a self that listens deeply, of a psyche that no longer hides. Because once you've heard the trumpet and risen, the only thing left is to dance.